Alex Bradford, an illustrious millionaire accustomed to lavish boardroom meetings, suddenly appears at the doors of a dilapidated homeless shelter, a place he never expected would lead him back to Emily, the ex-wife who vanished from his life after a bitter divorce. Amid the dreary, cramped atmosphere of the shelter, the moment Alex spots Emily cradling a fragile newborn in her arms sends his heart racing and leaves him stunned. The surroundings seem to blur as a flood of regret and pressing questions surge through his mind. Is that baby mine? Caught between hushed whispers, the wary gaze of the woman he once shared his life with, and the heavy burden of responsibility, Alex must decide: quietly walk away, or embark on a journey of redemption to save the family he once believed was lost forever. This is only the beginning of a deeply emotional series of events, where painful memories intertwine with hopes for a brighter future, promising profoundly moving moments for you. Can Alex atone for his mistakes? And will love and compassion be strong enough to help them overcome every obstacle? If you want to discover how this story unfolds, don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button on our channel, press like if you enjoy our content, and leave a comment to share your thoughts. Each bit of support motivates us to bring you more meaningful stories. Alex Bradford eased his sleek black automobile into the cramped parking lot of a weather-beaten building, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the faded sign that read, City Hope Shelter. He was far from the glitz and glamour of glass skyscrapers and formal boardrooms, the sort of realm where he typically moved with effortless confidence as a millionaire entrepreneur. Instead, he found himself stepping onto cracked pavement littered with autumn leaves and small puddles from a recent drizzle. This was a world that rarely intersected with his own, yet here he was, tugging at the cuffs of his tailored suit jacket. If anyone had asked him that morning why he would choose to spend time at a homeless shelter, he might have shrugged and mentioned a charitable campaign or a public relations initiative. The truth, however, was more nuanced. His PR team had been pressuring him to appear more human in the eyes of the media, to let the public see a softer side of the man behind a multi-million-dollar empire. Alex, initially indifferent to this suggestion, found his perspective shifting once he set foot on the shelter's threshold. Inside, the warmth of stoves cooking a simple meal contrasted sharply with the cool, bracing wind outside. Volunteers in matching aprons navigated the aisles of folding tables, distributing bowls of soup to families and individuals in need. The hum of conversation combined with the clatter of utensils on plastic trays created a subdued but hopeful atmosphere. Alex noticed how the children, though bundled in slightly worn jackets or sweaters, seemed eager to laugh and play, their spirits unbroken by challenging circumstances. An unexpected tug of emotion pulled at him, perhaps empathy, or maybe just discomfort at seeing real-life struggles up close. Whatever it was, it prickled along his skin, momentarily overshadowing the careful image he projected. He drew in a breath as he surveyed the room, his polished shoes tapping softly against the scuffed linoleum floor. His tall frame towered over most of the volunteers, some of whom offered polite smiles of welcome, more out of habit than recognition. They didn't know who he was, or maybe they didn't care. Alex found this anonymity refreshing yet unsettling, a reminder that away from his corporate sphere, his wealth and fame meant little to people fighting daily for survival. As he ventured further in, determined to observe but unsure of how to help, his gaze fell upon a corner where a worn-out metal chair stood against a plastered wall with chipped paint. A woman sat there, hunched slightly, cradling a newborn baby swaddled in a threadbare blanket. Her head was bent low as she tried to hush the softly whimpering child. Something about this scene held him transfixed. The vulnerability, the delicate hush, and an odd sense of déjà vu pricked at the back of his mind. Then, as she turned her face slightly toward the fluorescent light, he recognized her. It was Emily. In that single heartbeat, the gentle hum of the shelter's activities and the swirl of people around him faded to a muted blur. Emily, his ex-wife, the same Emily he had once called his partner, for a fleeting 6 months of marriage that ended 12 months ago in a torrent of bitterness and unresolved pain. He had not seen or heard from her since their tumultuous separation. And now, there she was, in an old coat and second-hand shoes, her gaze focused on the tiny life in her arms. Alex felt his heart lurch uncomfortably in his chest. The last time he had seen Emily, she was storming out of their penthouse after yet another excruciating argument about work, money, and how he never seemed to have time for the life they were supposed to build together. In a flash, memories of that final night washed over him. Her tearful eyes, the slammed door, the unyielding silence that followed. After their divorce, he had tried to drown his regret in corporate deals and endless business flights, attempting to pretend she had never been part of his carefully curated world. Yet the gnawing emptiness inside him never fully dissipated. It only dulled, overshadowed by daily demands. Even as he wrestled with the shock of seeing Emily, another realization struck him like a hammer blow. The tiny baby in her arms looked unbelievably fragile. Thin layers of soft baby blankets struggled to keep the child warm, and the mother's own jacket bore patches of frayed fabric. Though Emily's face was pale and etched with fatigue, she exuded a fierce protective aura around the child, an unmistakable maternal love that tugged at the guilt-ridden corners of Alex's mind. Was that baby hers? And if so, who was the father? Before he could gather his jumbled thoughts, a volunteer passed by, offering Emily a paper cup of tea. She thanked the volunteer quietly, the tension on her face easing only slightly as she took a sip. Alex caught sight of the hollowed look under her eyes. She had clearly been through more than he could guess. He remembered the Emily he once knew, vivacious, creative, with a passion for painting that lit up her entire being. She used to talk about opening an art gallery one day, hosting community workshops and inspiring young artists who lacked opportunities. Back then, her dream had felt too whimsical to Alex, who was consumed by growth charts and profit margins. He had never said it out loud, but he had quietly dismissed her aspirations, viewing them as a childish fantasy rather than a real, actionable plan. Now he wondered if that had been one of his greatest mistakes, among many. For a moment, Alex considered turning around, walking out the door, and never looking back. He didn't want to spark a confrontation when she was so vulnerable, nor did he want to face the uncomfortable truth that his former wife was living in a homeless shelter. But a surge of responsibility, and perhaps compassion, held him in place. He'd known heartbreak and regret, but nothing about this scenario felt even remotely acceptable to him. The PR reason for his visit vanished from his mind. This was personal. Whether she welcomed him or not, he had to speak to her, to understand why she was here and what had gone so catastrophically wrong. Swallowing his apprehension, Alex took a slow, measured step forward, then another, until he stood just a few paces away from Emily. She still hadn't looked up, her full attention devoted to soothing the baby, who shifted with a tiny whimper. He cleared his throat softly. When she finally raised her eyes, they widened in disbelief. In that unguarded instant, the distance of time and anger that had separated them shrank under the weight of an unspoken question. How did we end up here? "Alex?" she whispered, her voice carrying a note of shocked recognition that sent his nerves tingling. A single word, yet packed with a history they had never fully processed. A swirl of emotions flickered across her features: shock, hurt, disbelief, maybe even a trace of anger. She instinctively clutched the child closer, as if protecting him from a potential threat. Alex couldn't blame her. After all, he had been the one who walked out of their lives, leaving behind a trail of unspoken apologies and unresolved feelings. I came here with a charitable group," he managed to say, though the excuse felt hollow the moment it left his lips. His voice, usually calm and commanding in corporate settings, wavered now, betraying his uncertainty. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions: where she had been living, how she ended up in the shelter, and whose baby she held so carefully. But none of those words emerged. Instead, he found himself staring, heart pounding, as if he were an awkward teenager again, unsure how to approach the girl he'd admired from afar. Emily exhaled, a trembling breath that conveyed exhaustion and suspicion all at once. "Of course," she murmured, casting a furtive glance around the shelter, as if searching for an escape route. "I never thought I'd see you here, or anywhere." Her words landed like a blow, echoing with the bitterness of their past. They had once been inseparable, at least in the beginning, meeting at a high society fundraiser she'd only attended to showcase one of her paintings. Alex was drawn not only to her talent but also to her genuineness and warmth. For a man who thrived on deals, acquisitions, and profit, her perspective on life had felt like a much-needed breath of fresh air. They laughed, they danced, and they fell in love under the glow of city lights. But as his empire expanded, his time for Emily shrank. He missed anniversaries, canceled spontaneous getaways, and answered phone calls during dinners that were meant to be about them. Eventually, their once passionate union cracked under the strain, and a final argument, fueled by accusations and misunderstandings, led them to sign divorce papers after only 6 months of marriage. That was a year ago. Today, her presence here, in a shelter, felt both surreal and heartbreaking. "I didn't expect this," Alex admitted, struggling to hide the lump in his throat. He stole a glance at the tiny infant, who was now dozing in Emily's arms, eyelids fluttering softly. Even from where he stood, he could see how little the baby had. Just a thin, tired blanket and a worn onesie. Guilt flooded him. He had been living in a penthouse, moving from one plush event to another, while Emily and this child had apparently been scraping by for the basic necessities. She let out a resigned sigh, and for a moment her eyes softened before flickering back to caution. "Neither did I," she said. "But life doesn't always go as planned." Alex reached for a nearby folding chair, his movements slow and non-threatening, and sat down beside her. He wanted to offer help, but the words felt clumsy. Finally, he said the only thing that came to mind. "Emily, are you okay? Is this your baby?" A million other questions lurked beneath, chief among them, "Is he mine?" Emily's eyes flashed with a storm of emotion at his hesitant question. She looked away, focusing on a spot on the peeling wall, as if it held answers to her troubles. "His name is Oliver," she said quietly, dodging the more direct inquiry. "He's 2 weeks old." The baby stirred at the mention of his name, tiny fists twitching beneath the blanket. Emily smiled down at him, a tender gesture that underscored the fierce love and devotion she felt for her child. Seeing that soft expression on her face took Alex back to memories of gentler days, quiet mornings when she would share her artistic dreams over coffee, or late nights when they'd watch the city skyline from their balcony. But that recollection only deepened the sense of loss roiling in his chest. 2 weeks old. If the timeline was correct, there was a real possibility that Oliver was his son, conceived shortly before they finalized their divorce. Yet he couldn't bring himself to press that question upon her right now. Something in Emily's demeanor warned him that trust was a fragile commodity between them. He steadied his voice, attempting diplomacy. "He's beautiful," he offered. "But Emily, why are you here? At a shelter? What happened?" Despite the swirl of tension between them, genuine concern pushed him to find out how she'd fallen into such dire circumstances. She bit her lower lip. A range of emotions flickered across her face, pride, anger, sorrow, before she finally responded. The short version? "I left our penthouse with little more than a suitcase in hopes of finding my own place." She spoke slowly, as if each syllable weighed heavily on her. "I managed to get a small apartment, but when I discovered I was pregnant, everything changed. Work became harder to balance. Commissions for my paintings slowed down, and then I started missing rent payments. Eventually, I had to choose: keep a roof over my head or buy the things I needed for the baby. I tried to manage it all, but..." She trailed off, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Alex felt each of her words drilling into him, igniting a sense of responsibility and regret. Why hadn't he reached out after the divorce? Pride, perhaps, or the misguided assumption that she was happier without him. He cleared his throat. "Emily, you should have contacted me. I could have helped." She whipped her gaze back to him, eyes flashing. "Helped? Like you helped by walking out on me, ignoring my calls when I needed you to talk, acting like your schedule was more important than your own wife." The venom in her words was tempered by fatigue, but the sting was still there. Alex didn't try to defend himself. There was no denying he had done exactly that. "I didn't think you'd want to be part of this," she added after a moment, looking down at Oliver with a mixture of guilt and protectiveness. "Part of us." Feeling her anger and heartbreak swirl in the air between them, Alex swallowed. "Emily, maybe I didn't deserve to know, but Oliver..." His voice cracked slightly. "Is he..." My son? Emily's posture stiffened. The hesitation in her eyes spoke volumes before she answered. Yes, she said quietly, her voice trembling. Oliver is your son. The words tumbled into the space between them like a quiet explosion, rippling outward. Despite his suspicions, hearing it confirmed set Alex's heart racing. He felt breathless, stunned, as if the floor had tilted under his feet. Somewhere in the swirl of shock and disbelief was a spark of something that felt like joy, along with an intense guilt that he hadn't been there for the first moments of his child's life. For several long beats, neither of them spoke. The chatter and shuffle of the shelter seemed to amplify around them, accentuating the charged silence. Finally, Alex found his voice, though it sounded rough and distant to his own ears. I had no idea, he breathed. Emily, I would have... She cut him off, though her tone was less accusatory now, replaced by exhausted frustration. You would have what, Alex? Been there for me? Suddenly made time in your schedule for a wife and baby you wrote off as a burdensome distraction? She shook her head, pressing her lips into a thin line. I believed in you once, in us, but you proved me wrong time and time again. Her words struck painfully, but Alex managed a nod. I know I failed you, he said softly, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. He wanted to reach out, maybe place a comforting hand on her arm, but he sensed it might be too soon. I can't change the past, Emily, but I'd like to help now, in any way you'd let me. Oliver shifted again, and Emily rocked him gently, her expression torn. For a split second, Alex wondered if she might rebuff him entirely, sending him away so she could nurse her wounds and care for Oliver alone. Yet the determined glint in her eyes made him suspect that she was thinking about what was best for the baby. Still, she remained guarded, with good reason. I don't need your pity, she said, voice carrying the undercurrent of a woman forced by circumstance into stubborn independence. I've managed this far, and Oliver is my priority. It's not pity, Alex replied quickly, searching her face for a crack in her defensive walls. It's regret, or maybe guilt. I want to be part of his life, part of your life if you'll let me. I know it won't be easy, but let me help, financially at least. A stable place for you to live, proper care for Oliver. That's the least I can offer. Emily shut her eyes briefly, as if waging a silent internal battle. She exhaled slowly and lifted her gaze to meet his. Help doesn't fix a broken relationship, she said, her voice hushed. But Oliver does need stability. He needs to be out of this place, out of communal living where everything is unpredictable. If you're serious and not just trying to ease a guilty conscience, I'll think about it. Alex nodded, feeling a small measure of relief. It was a crack in her armor, a tentative acceptance, and it was more than he deserved. In the following days, Alex found it impossible to slip back into his old routines with a clear conscience. Though his work demands remained intense, back-to-back meetings, negotiations, and strategic planning for his latest corporate acquisition, he spent every spare moment at the shelter, forging a plan to help Emily transition into a safer, more stable environment. He met with the shelter's director, a kind but overworked woman named Linda, who offered insight into the challenges that families like Emily's faced daily. Linda explained that many women ended up here due to a sudden loss of income, abusive relationships, or simply misfortune that spiraled out of control. Alex felt an unfamiliar but pressing urgency to assist, not just by writing a check, but by truly engaging. One afternoon, he arrived at the shelter with a trunk full of baby supplies, diapers, formula, warm blankets, and a stroller he had researched extensively, wanting to ensure Oliver had something practical and safe. He wasn't sure how Emily would react, but he was committed to showing, not just telling, that he was here to help. As he hauled boxes through the shelter's entrance, he spotted her at a small table, bottle-feeding Oliver. Her eyes flickered toward him with a mix of caution and curiosity. "Hi," he greeted, feeling oddly self-conscious. "I picked up some things for Oliver, and for you." He set the items down, stepping back to gauge her reaction. Emily's gaze swept over the mound of supplies. Relief was evident. She couldn't hide the slight relaxation in her shoulders, but she pressed her lips together, struggling to maintain a balanced expression. "That's a lot," she said, her voice uncertain. Alex ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of her doubt. I didn't mean to overwhelm you, I just want to make sure Oliver has what he needs. He paused, then added, and you too. She exhaled slowly. Thank you. These will help. Her tone was measured, as though she was trying not to reveal too much gratitude or too much vulnerability, but the tiniest hint of a smile betrayed her internal conflict. So what's the plan, Alex? You show up here with supplies, you talk about helping, but do you even have time for any of this? Last I checked, you were too busy to eat breakfast with me, let alone handle a baby. Her question held echoes of old resentments, but Alex understood her skepticism. I've rearranged my schedule, he said simply. I have an amazing team at my company. I've delegated many tasks so I can focus on what's important. And right now, that's you and Oliver. The baby, as if sensing the tension, let out a small coo that drew both of their gazes. For a brief moment, their eyes met over Oliver's tiny form, and Alex felt a surge of something that might have been hope. The memory of their old battles still loomed, but the presence of this child, their child, hinted at a possibility neither had fully acknowledged. Maybe they could find common ground in caring for their son. Determined to follow through on his promise, Alex arranged a meeting with a real estate contact he trusted, hoping to secure a modest but comfortable apartment for Emily and Oliver. He didn't expect her to leap at the offer, given her wariness, but he wanted to be prepared. Late one evening, after helping serve dinner at the shelter, he found Emily in the rec room, lightly bouncing Oliver in her arms to soothe his cries. The baby had been fussing more than usual, perhaps colic, perhaps the stress of shelter life. Alex stood in the doorway, hesitant. Everything okay? He asked quietly, not wanting to startle her. She glanced up, dark circles under her eyes. He's just unsettled, she murmured. Sometimes if I pace the hallway, it helps him sleep, but all the noise doesn't help. Indeed, the shelter was bustling with activity even at this late hour. Others were tidying, some guests chatted in low voices, and a few children were playing in a corner. Privacy was scarce. Let me hold him, Alex offered, stepping closer. Emily paused for a beat, then wordlessly handed Oliver over. Alex gently rested Oliver's head against his shoulder, patting softly. The baby continued to fuss, but his crying gradually softened. Emily watched with a guarded curiosity, arms folded as if ready to intervene if Alex faltered. To both of their surprise, Oliver's whimpers turned into soft hiccups. Within a few moments, the baby's eyelids drooped, lulled to sleep by Alex's rhythmic patting. An unexpected wave of emotion churned in Alex's chest, pride, tenderness, and an ache for all the moments he'd already missed. He felt Emily's gaze on him and turned to see her face etched with conflicting feelings. Her defenses were still there, but something about watching him calm their child seemed to move her. Thank you, she said quietly, her fingers brushing away a stray strand of hair. It helps, having someone else to hold him once in a while. Alex ventured a careful smile. I can do more. I want to do more. I've already found a couple of potential apartments close to the city center. Nothing huge, just comfortable. If you want, we can check them out. A flicker of apprehension crossed her expression, but she nodded slowly. I'll look, she replied. But don't assume that means that everything between us is okay. I'm doing this for Oliver. I understand, Alex said, shifting Oliver gently to his other shoulder. One step at a time. Emily studied him, her posture relaxing ever so slightly. You're different, you know, she said, nearly under her breath. I don't know if it's permanent or just a phase, but you're not the same person I left. Her words lingered in the air, and he let them stand without protest. He was different, at least he hoped so. Deep within him was the realization that life had never been about the relentless pursuit of money and success, no matter how many times the old Alex might have insisted otherwise. Taking in the fragile form of his sleeping son, he knew that if he wanted any chance of repairing what he had broken, he would have to continue on this path of humility and consistent action, proving day by day that he deserved to be part of their lives. Over the next week, Alex and Emily maintained a cautious alliance. Each day, Alex stopped by the shelter, sometimes to drop off supplies, other times to help serve meals or troubleshoot small issues, like the broken hinge on the rec room door that kept jamming, or a malfunctioning space heater that left certain corners of the building chilly. With every genuine act of support, he inched a little closer to Emily's guarded heart. Though her trust was far from restored, she no longer looked at him as if he were an intruder in her world. At times, Alex's presence sparked curiosity among the other shelter residents. Whispers circulated about the well-dressed man who showed up daily, working side by side with volunteers. Some recognized him from news articles about his business achievements. A few approached him shyly, asking if he could help them find jobs or stable living arrangements. Initially taken aback, Alex discovered that his connections and resources could actually make a tangible difference. He found himself talking to corporate partners about potential job openings for shelter residents and offering to sponsor certain job training programs. Each day, he felt more convinced that this, helping, being present, caring, was far more rewarding than any corporate accolade he had ever chased. Meanwhile, Emily observed from the sidelines, both touched and wary. She'd occasionally catch glimpses of him chatting with Linda about funding ideas or kneeling down to teach a toddler how to stack plastic blocks. Part of her felt an inexplicable warmth at the sight, recalling how Alex had once been so distant and unavailable for any non-business activity. Another part of her braced for disappointment, wondering when he might lose interest and revert to old habits. That lingering doubt came to a head one evening when Alex arranged for Emily to view an apartment located a short walk from the shelter. He had insisted on offering her a ride, but she chose to meet him there. Upon arrival, she found him standing on the sidewalk, a key in hand, looking both hopeful and nervous. The building was an older structure but appeared well maintained, its lobby free of the grime often found in low-cost housing. Inside the unit, the floors were hardwood, the walls freshly painted in a soft cream color. There was even a small second bedroom that could be a nursery for Oliver. Emily walked slowly through the rooms, running her hand along the smooth walls and glancing out the windows at the city skyline beyond. She paused in the nursery space, imagining how she might decorate it with her paintings. Alex lingered nearby, respectful of her space. "What do you think?" he finally ventured. She turned to face him. "It's nice," she admitted, eyes settling on Oliver, who was dozing in a borrowed car seat. "More than nice, actually." He nodded, exhaling in relief. "If you like it, I can handle the lease. You'll never have to worry about rent or eviction again. You can focus on caring for Oliver, and maybe your art too." Emily's expression flickered, torn between gratitude and a sense of independence she'd fought hard to maintain. "I appreciate it," she said, "but I need to be sure this is something I can handle on my own at some point. I don't want to feel like I'm living off your charity." Alex dipped his head. "It's not charity," he replied softly. "It's me finally doing what I should have done all along, taking care of my family. But I get it. We'll figure out a way that feels right for you." She offered a small nod, a silent acknowledgement that, for the first time in a very long while, they might be moving in the same direction. Still, uncertainty haunted her. Trust wouldn't be rebuilt overnight, and both of them knew it. Yet, as she looked at Oliver's peaceful face and then back at Alex, she dared to imagine that maybe, just maybe, this could be the first step toward the second chance she had never dreamed possible. The following morning, sunlight streamed through the shelter's windows as volunteers bustled about, arranging supplies for breakfast. Emily was preparing to bathe Oliver in one of the small, makeshift nursery areas. She was simultaneously hopeful about the new apartment and anxious about the path forward with Alex. Even if they managed to secure housing and some sense of stability, she knew the emotional scars would not heal overnight. She glanced up when she heard Alex's voice in the hallway. He was speaking with Linda about some upcoming fundraising ideas, proposing ways to gather more community support for the shelter. The ease with which he conversed and the sincerity in his tone was a stark contrast to the man she'd been married to, a man she remembered as perpetually stressed and narrowly focused on profit margins and business expansions. This new Alex seemed genuinely concerned about people beyond his immediate circle, yet Emily couldn't help the flicker of doubt. Would this last? She had seen him lose interest in many passion projects before, especially once work ramped up. Taking a steadying breath, she lifted Oliver from the small plastic tub and wrapped him in a warm towel. Gently cradling him, she stepped into the hallway, almost colliding with Alex, who was walking in with a freshly printed stack of flyers. He caught her arm to steady her. "Sorry," he murmured, before noticing Oliver in her arms. A smile broke across his face. "Hey there, little guy." Oliver squirmed, his tiny mouth forming an O of surprise. Emily gently patted him dry as Alex's gaze turned serious. "Linda just told me they're struggling to keep up with the winter demand," he said. "They need more blankets, coats, and funds for heating bills. I'm trying to organize a clothing drive." Emily nodded, shifting her weight. "That's really thoughtful. This time of year is always hardest on shelters. I used to volunteer at one before." She cut herself off. Before their marriage, she used to do local charity events, exhibit her paintings at small community auctions, and donate the proceeds. She realized now how she had slowly let that part of herself fade away under the stresses of their relationship. Alex reached out, taking Oliver's small hand in his. The baby closed his tiny fingers around Alex's thumb. "I want to do more than just donate," Alex said quietly. "I know money is helpful, but there's a bigger issue at play. So many people end up here because they've got nowhere else to go." Without meaning to, Emily smiled at the sight of Oliver holding onto his father's hand. Then she cleared her throat. "I could help with the drive. I have connections in the art community. Some of them might be willing to host a fundraising event or donate pieces that we could auction off." Alex's gaze lit up, as though he were seeing a spark of the woman he'd first fallen for. "That would be amazing. If you're comfortable reaching out to them, I'll take care of logistics." A small bubble of hope expanded in Emily's chest. Working together for a cause that extended beyond them felt right. She brushed a kiss against Oliver's forehead. Maybe this was how they started rebuilding, side by side, for something bigger than themselves. That evening, they found a moment alone in the shelter's cramped office, a space filled with mismatched file cabinets and half-donated computer equipment. Alex had set up a meeting with a potential sponsor for the shelter, a local philanthropic group that funded community initiatives. Emily joined him, partly to ensure she stayed informed and partly because she felt a growing sense of responsibility toward the place that had sheltered her darkest days. Sitting across from them was a representative from the philanthropic group, an older gentleman named Mr. Thompson, who wore a warm smile and carried a folder of pamphlets. He explained that his organization regularly provided grants for shelters like this one, but the competition for funds was stiff, and they often required evidence of strong leadership, clear financial planning, and a track record of responsible fund usage. Alex was a natural in this environment. He spoke confidently about the improvements they hoped to implement: better heating, a stable flow of clothes and food donations, educational programs for children, and job placement assistance for adults. Emily added details about how the arts could help residents express their experiences and heal. The synergy between them was evident. They complemented each other's points, painting a holistic vision of what the shelter could become with the right support. Mr. Thompson seemed impressed. He took notes, asked pointed questions about the budget, and requested to see a long-term plan. Alex promised to provide those details promptly. By the end of the discussion, the atmosphere crackled with promise. Mr. Thompson stood, shook their hands, and nodded. "We're always looking for solid community projects," he said. "I see a lot of potential here." After he left, Emily leaned back in her chair, feeling an odd but pleasant swirl of exhaustion and accomplishment. She glanced at Alex, who seemed similarly exhilarated. "We make a good team," she admitted quietly, turning a pencil over in her hand. Alex offered a small, hopeful smile. "We always did," he replied. "When we worked together, I mean. It just got lost in everything else." A memory tugged at Emily. Late nights in their penthouse, brainstorming how to blend her passion for art with his knack for business, hoping to create community events that fused creativity and philanthropy. But those discussions had always been derailed by a work call or an urgent email that demanded Alex's attention. Thinking about it now, she recognized how many times she'd tried to share her world with him, only to be overshadowed by his corporate demands. She sighed, placing the pencil neatly on the desk. I guess this is our second shot at making those dreams real, she said, her voice tinged with both sadness and a cautious optimism. Yeah, Alex agreed softly. He lifted his phone, which had been buzzing with notifications, and silenced it. And this time, he added, meeting her gaze, I'm not letting the old me get in the way. For a beat, they simply held each other's eyes, a silent acknowledgement of how far they had come and how much further they still had to go. The road to genuine reconciliation was uncertain, but the sense of shared purpose was a new, invigorating bond, one that, in its best moments, reminded them of why they had fallen in love in the first place. However, the path to rebuilding trust and stability was not without obstacles. As word spread of Alex's involvement and the shelter's potential new funding sources, unexpected complications arose. One especially troubling issue surfaced when Linda called Emily and Alex into her cramped office, her brows knitted in concern. She held a letter with the logo of a major private sponsor at the top, a sponsor that had quietly been backing the shelter for years, albeit with minimal publicity. Linda read from the letter, her voice tight. Due to recent inquiries about financial management, we regret to inform you that we will be suspending all future donations until the matter is resolved. Emily's heart plummeted. The letter also mentioned the possibility of cutting ties entirely if they couldn't clarify certain concerns. What does that even mean? Emily demanded, anxiety spiking in her chest. She'd been meticulous about the shelter's budget during her stay, and Linda was highly ethical in her practices. None of it made sense. Alex frowned, rubbing his temples. Financial mismanagement? That's a serious accusation. There must be some misunderstanding. Who's behind this letter? Linda sighed, glancing at the sponsor's name. Robert Carrington. He's a philanthropist who's been donating under the radar for a long time, but apparently he got wind of some rumor or is responding to new intel about how the shelter's run. Something in Alex's eyes flickered. Recognition or dismay, perhaps. Emily noticed and felt a small coil of dread twist in her stomach. You know him? She asked, her tone sharper than intended. Alex exhaled slowly. Yes, Robert Carrington is an old family friend. He's known for being protective of his reputation. After I discovered you were here, I reached out to him a while back, discreetly, to learn more about the shelter's background and how it was funded. I was trying to figure out the best way to help, but I never expected he'd react by pulling the plug. I didn't mean to cause any damage. Linda placed the letter on the desk with a grimace. His donations cover nearly half of our monthly operating costs. If we lose that, the shelter will be in crisis mode, especially with winter coming up. This place could close its doors to new families, or worse, shut down entirely. Emily's pulse pounded in her ears. She swung her gaze to Alex. So because you snooped around, we might lose everything? The tremor in her voice betrayed both anger and fear. Oliver, sleeping in a portable bassinet nearby, let out a small whimper as if sensing the tension in the room. Alex's shoulders sagged. I had no idea Carrington would respond this way, but I won't let the shelter go under. I'll fix this. I'll meet with him personally. Let me handle it, please. His expression was sincere, but Emily's walls, those protective barriers she had painstakingly erected, suddenly felt necessary again. I can't believe you went behind my back like this, she hissed, keeping her voice low so as not to wake Oliver. You jeopardized everything that matters to me, and now you expect me to just trust you to fix it. I'm sorry, Alex said, lowering his voice to match hers. I truly am. But let me make it right. I'll do whatever it takes. Linda intervened before Emily could respond. Look, we can't afford to lose this sponsor. Whether it's a misunderstanding or not, we need to address it immediately. Alex, if you can get a meeting with Robert, please do it soon. That night, Emily found it impossible to sleep. She paced the cramped sleeping area she shared with Oliver, her mind ablaze with questions. Had she been foolish to let Alex get so close again? Her heart clenched at the thought that maybe all his well-intentioned efforts could unravel with one phone call to the wrong person. Meanwhile, Oliver's soft breathing reminded her that she needed to remain calm for his sake, but anxiety gnawed at her all the same. By morning, the tension in the shelter was palpable. Linda tried to comfort Emily, insisting that if anyone could reason with Carrington, it would be Alex, given their personal connection. Emily, though, couldn't shake the sense of betrayal. Alex had been digging into her situation without telling her, consulting a powerful figure whose actions now threatened the very foundation that had kept her and Oliver safe. Despite the friction, Alex stayed true to his word. He secured a swift appointment with Robert Carrington at the philanthropist's upscale office. Dressed in a tailored suit that he hadn't worn in weeks, Alex felt a touch of the old corporate bravado return as he navigated the polished marble floors and the hush of secretaries who recognized him. But this time, his motivation wasn't about sealing a deal for personal gain. It was about saving the place that sheltered his ex-wife and child, two people he was determined not to fail again. Inside a spacious corner office with panoramic city views, Robert Carrington greeted him with a guarded handshake. He was an imposing figure in his late 50s, exuding the air of a man accustomed to wielding influence. "Alex, it's been a while," he remarked. "I was surprised to hear you were supporting that shelter so intently." Alex squared his shoulders, maintaining composure. "Robert, there's been a misunderstanding. Pulling your funding will devastate hundreds of people, including children. I need you to reconsider." Robert's mouth flattened into a thin line. "Misunderstanding or not, I've heard alarming things about their management. Heard they're funneling resources unwisely, that there might be personal agendas at play. As someone conscious of my reputation, I can't be affiliated with something that might blow up in my face." Alex's jaw tightened. He knew this was likely about rumors swirling since he'd started digging. "I've been hands-on with the shelter," he said firmly. "I know the staff. I've seen the budgets. There's no corruption or mismanagement. They're stretched thin because they're underfunded, not because they're irresponsible. Your withdrawal could literally force families onto the streets in the coldest part of the year." A spark of impatience flickered in Robert's eyes. "It's not my responsibility to fund them if there's risk involved. You should understand that as a businessman." Alex inhaled slowly, recalling how he used to be the same way, prioritizing risk assessments and returns on investment. But this was different. "I do understand," he said, controlling his tone. "But I'm telling you, you're basing your decision on bad intel. I'll personally vouch for the shelter's operations. If you have concerns, send an auditor, but don't yank your support. These people need time, resources, and consistency, things your funding has been providing." Robert eyed him carefully. After a long silence, he spoke. "It's rare I see you so invested in a charitable cause, Alex. This wouldn't happen to be about that ex-wife of yours, would it?" The question was like a dart, hitting the center of Alex's chest. He struggled to keep his composure, the mention of Emily immediately sharpening his protective instincts. "Yes," he said quietly. "She and my son are there, and that's why I won't let your misunderstanding destroy it." Robert leaned back in his chair, amusement dancing in his eyes. "Ah, so it's a personal crusade. I get it now." He tapped a manicured fingernail against his desk. "You know how gossip can spread. People might say you're throwing money at a place just to fix your public image or to appease your ex-wife. That's not exactly the philanthropic stance I admire." Despite the barb, Alex refused to rise to the bait. "Call it whatever you want," he said calmly. "But if you think it's just for show, then come see for yourself. Talk to Linda, talk to the residents, look at the records. You'll see that the work they're doing is invaluable, and if you're unconvinced after that, then at least you'll have valid grounds for your decision." A guarded silence followed. Robert finally nodded, albeit reluctantly. "I'll consider it, but I'm not making any promises." With that, he rose to signal the meeting was over. Alex offered a curt handshake before heading out, his head buzzing with concerns. He needed to find a way to put a definitive end to the sponsor's suspicions, or else the entire operation, and Emily's fragile trust, might collapse. Back at the shelter, Emily waited anxiously, her heart pounding each time someone entered through the battered front doors. When Alex finally returned, shoulders taut and face set in a mask of determination, she quickly approached him. "Well?" she asked, crossing her arms defensively, as if bracing for bad news. He exhaled, trying to contain his frustration. "He's not convinced yet, but I got him to agree to look into the matter more carefully. There's a chance he'll send someone to review the shelter's records. At least it's not an outright refusal to continue funding." Emily chewed her bottom lip, relief mingling with wariness. "So what now?" We just wait to be evaluated like a business on the brink? If that's what it takes, Alex replied, quiet resolve in his voice. Then yes. But we'll be ready. Linda's records are impeccable, and the residents will vouch for how important this place is. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, but she stiffened before nodding curtly. That night, Linda and the staff began organizing every scrap of documentation they had: purchase receipts, donation logs, monthly financial statements. Emily pulled long hours, double-checking the records for any discrepancies. At times, she caught herself glancing at Alex, who also worked tirelessly, fielding phone calls and scanning digital copies. Despite her anger over his earlier misstep, she couldn't deny he was doing everything possible now. Exhausted, Emily finally sat down, propping Oliver on her lap. The baby cooed softly, tugging at her shirt. Alex, noticing her fatigue, approached with a weary but supportive smile. "Here," he said gently. "Let me hold him for a bit." She paused, meeting his eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, passing Oliver over. In that brief exchange, she felt the smallest flicker of gratitude toward him, overshadowing her lingering resentment. They were in a battle to save the shelter, and each other. Perhaps, she mused, that battle itself would prove the crucible that showed them whether they truly had a future together. Days blurred into a whirlwind of preparations. True to his word, Robert Carrington sent an auditor to the shelter. An austere woman in a charcoal gray suit arrived, armed with a clipboard and a critical eye. She interviewed Linda and other staff members, took notes on the building's condition, and examined records with the intensity of someone determined to find a flaw. Emily felt her anxiety spike each time the auditor paused or frowned at a figure. Alex, on the other hand, maintained a calm facade, though Emily knew he must be worried about how swiftly a single negative report could unravel everything. During the auditor's visit, the families staying at the shelter went about their daily routines, preparing meals, helping children with homework, and seeking job opportunities. It was life at its rawest, unaffected by corporate power games. Yet, everyone felt the tension in the air. If Carrington's funding was cut, a roof over their heads might become a luxury too precious to maintain. One late afternoon, the auditor requested a private meeting with Emily. They sat at a small table near the office, a battered potted plant wilting in the corner. The woman cleared her throat. "I understand you lived here for a time, still do actually, and that you also have a personal relationship with the benefactor who's been around recently, Alex Bradford." Emily bristled, anticipating an undercurrent of suspicion. "Yes, Alex is my ex-husband. We share a child, but my role here at the shelter has been as a resident and volunteer, not as his liaison." Jotting down a note, the auditor asked, "And how did Mr. Bradford come to finance so many improvements so quickly? Was he pressuring you or the shelter to accept his support in a particular way?" The insinuation pricked Emily's nerves. "No, absolutely not. He just wanted to help, especially once he learned Oliver and I were here. The improvements, blankets, supplies, events, were all done openly and documented. Linda can provide you with receipts." The auditor eyed her. "And does your relationship with Mr. Bradford compromise the shelter's autonomy in any way?" Emily's temper flared. "Compromise? The only thing Alex has done is step up when we needed assistance. If that's compromise, maybe we need more of it." She took a breath, forcing her tone back to calm. "Look, I'm the first to question Alex's motivations. We went through a lot of conflict in the past. But in this situation, I can't deny he's done right by the shelter and by me." The woman jotted another note, face impassive. "Thank you," she said, standing to indicate the conversation was over. An hour later, the auditor left, documents in hand, promising to deliver a formal report to Robert Carrington. Exhaustion washed over Emily. She slumped onto a wobbly chair in the hallway, Oliver safely napping in a bassinet nearby. Alex noticed and walked over, worry carved into his brow. "How did it go?" "I'm not sure," she admitted. "She was thorough, that's for sure. Now we just wait." He sat down beside her, leaning forward to rest his elbows on his knees. "We'll get through this," he said gently. Emily closed her eyes, letting out a trembling sigh. For everyone's sake, I hope so. She felt his warmth beside her and heard Oliver's quiet breaths. In that moment, she understood that the outcome of the audit and Robert Carrington's eventual decision would be a turning point not just for the shelter, but for the tentative future she was allowing herself to envision with Alex. Waiting for the verdict, they clung to each small sign of hope in an uncertain storm. 3 days later, the verdict arrived via an official-looking email sent to Linda, who wasted no time calling an impromptu meeting in the shelter's modest main office. Emily, Alex, and a few other staff members gathered around a battered laptop as Linda opened the message. Her eyes scanned the text and a slow smile spread across her face. "We're cleared," she breathed. "The auditor found no evidence of mismanagement. Carrington's funding will continue, for now." Relief swept through the room like a collective exhale. Emily felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes as she reached for Oliver, who had begun to fuss. Alex gently squeezed her shoulder, a silent gesture of shared triumph. Linda read on. "There's one condition, though. Robert Carrington wants quarterly updates, an open invitation to send additional auditors if necessary. But that's manageable." She turned to Alex and Emily, beaming. "You both saved this place, you know." Alex cleared his throat, looking down almost bashfully. "It wasn't just us. You and the entire staff here do the real work every day. We just prevented a disaster." Still, the glow of victory was undeniable. That evening, the shelter felt less like a place of desperation and more like a community on the mend. Volunteers served dinner with extra smiles. Residents chatted excitedly about the news, and Linda even played some upbeat music on a dusty old radio. As the atmosphere buzzed with excitement, Emily slipped outside to a small courtyard behind the shelter to breathe in the crisp night air. She still couldn't believe how close they had come to catastrophe. The fact that Alex had stepped up, fighting fiercely for the shelter, for her and for Oliver, left her feeling both indebted and unsteady. Could she really open her heart to him again? The courtyard lights cast a warm glow on the concrete path. Emily ran a hand over her tired face and was startled when Alex joined her, sliding the door shut behind him. He didn't speak immediately, just gazed at her with those familiar eyes that carried relief, gratitude, and something else, an earnest longing for her forgiveness. "Thank you," she said softly, beating him to it. "You fought for us, for me. I wasn't used to that." He stepped closer, the autumn chill swirling around them. "You're worth fighting for," he replied, the sincerity in his voice tugging at her defenses. "I know I messed up before, letting my work consume me, letting you down. But I promise you, Emily, I've learned what really matters." She dropped her gaze to the concrete. A swirl of emotions, longing, doubt, gratitude, whirled inside. "I'm still not sure how to trust that this will last," she admitted. "We've come a long way, but old wounds don't just vanish." Alex nodded, understanding. "I'll keep showing you, day by day, hour by hour. Whatever it takes to prove you and Oliver aren't just a phase or a project to me." They stood there in the chilly air, silent for a moment. Eventually, Emily let out a shaky breath, nodded, and took Oliver from his stroller to hold him close. The baby cooed, and she reached for Alex's hand, guiding it toward their child. The simple gesture said what words could not: a tentative acceptance, a fragile willingness to let him in just a bit more. Under the glow of the courtyard lights, they formed a circle of three, united by a brand new kind of hope. As winter's edge arrived, the city's nights grew colder, but the shelter's warmth and stability flourished. Thanks to renewed funding and Alex's expanded network of supporters, City Hope Shelter gained not just financial backing, but a reputation as a model for community care. New coats and blankets arrived in steady streams, and volunteers organized hot meal plans for anyone facing hunger during the frigid months. In the midst of all this progress, Emily found herself gradually letting down more barriers when it came to Alex. She accepted his help with Oliver more readily, allowing him to rock the baby to sleep, feed him mashed vegetables, and even accompany them on routine pediatric checkups. Each small collaboration built upon the next, forging a delicate bond that felt stronger than the fleeting sparks they'd once clung to. And although Emily remained cautious, each day seemed to suggest a new future might truly be possible for them. One snowy afternoon, Alex proposed something that caught Emily by surprise: a small holiday gathering at the shelter for the residents, complete with music, decorations, and a fundraising auction featuring donated art pieces from local artists, some of whom Emily knew from her earlier aspirations. She agreed to help organize it, somewhat excited by the chance to revisit her creative background. Together, they set up displays in the newly refurbished community room, hung twinkling lights, and placed Oliver's stroller near the entrance so he could enjoy the sights, while presumably dozing off to the lull of holiday tunes. The event was a resounding success. Families bundled in sweaters admired the art. Children laughed as they tasted gingerbread cookies for the first time, and the hush of winter outside contrasted beautifully with the vibrant cheer inside. Sensing a rare moment of calm, Alex and Emily stepped away from the crowd, heading to a smaller alcove, decorated with a cluster of homemade ornaments. Oliver rested in Emily's arms, wide-eyed as though mesmerized by the lights. They stood quietly for a time, both drinking in the scene around them. Families once at the brink of despair, now enjoying a safe evening, courtesy of the shelter's newfound resilience. The knowledge that their combined efforts had played a role in this transformation lit a warmth in Emily's chest that no fireplace could match. Suddenly, Alex turned toward her, his expression earnest and tender. "You once told me you dreamed of opening an art gallery for underprivileged youth," he said softly. "Of using art to bring hope. That dream doesn't have to die, Emily. It can still happen. I want to help you make it real, however I can." The sincerity in his words brought a lump to her throat. She looked down at Oliver, who gurgled happily, oblivious to the weight of the moment. Then she raised her eyes to Alex. "I want that too," she whispered. "Someday. Maybe we can do it together." With that, Alex carefully placed a hand atop Oliver's small head. "I'd like that," he said, voice thick with emotion. In that room filled with the glow of holiday lights and the gentle hum of families rediscovering joy, Emily allowed herself the fragile hope that they could truly rebuild, a family bound by something deeper than regret or obligation, shaped by a love tested through separation and hardship. As Oliver snuggled closer, she felt the stirring of a future that was once unthinkable, one where they stood united, offering not just personal redemption, but a renewed belief in second chances, for themselves and for every soul seeking shelter from life's storms. And so, under the sparkling lights, amidst heartfelt laughter and the promise of change, their story found its turning point, the place where regret bowed to hope, and the chance at a brighter tomorrow opened the door to a brand new beginning.